that's a hard thing to set up. And when you have so much to do, it's difficult.
Yeah.
I get it, it's difficult. And then, not to mention the fact that we're also going to have to be dealing with the death of Carrie Fisher, who was supposed to be one of the main characters of this movie.
Right. Yeah.
And that is going to dramatically change the type of story you're able to tell in the first place.
Yeah.
Welcome to Certain Point of View's Another Pass podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Just go to certainpov.com.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Another Pass podcast. I'm Case Aiken, and as always, I am joined by my co-host, Sam Alisea.
Hello.
And today we are joined by Nerd About Town, Adam Lance Garcia.
That is the most accurate I've never had that most accurate of description yet. Nerd About Town. Yeah. No, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I am. You win. I've been on a lot of podcasts now where I was like, well, how do I intro you? Nerd About Town. Yep. That's it.
Yeah. Well, last time you and I were talking was over on the Men of Steel podcast,
Yes.
where we were talking about Superman 3.
God, yeah.
And we figured,
movie.
hey, that was a bit more off your specific brand. Today we wanted to talk about something a bit more on brand. But that brand, if you want to sort of give some quick plugs, by all means.
Well, my brand is, if you follow me on Twitter, it's mostly every morning you'll know how many days are left to whatever upcoming Star Wars project is coming. Right now, I'm counting down to Rogue Squadron and Book of Boba Fett. But mostly, I just like Star Wars publicly. I'm a writer and I'm a producer. I've got a upcoming audio drama based on the Green Llama coming out November 5th, and a couple of other projects that are in the works that I really want to talk about. But my day job is I work at Condé Nast, interviewing celebrities for a living. It is a weird-ass job. I'll tell you about it later.
Yeah. Well, and so, as you said, you talk a lot about Star Wars, and this show is built on a foundation of Star Wars. The Certain POV podcast network was initially a Star Wars show that spun off into all kinds of crazy stuff. Another Pass began as a discussion of the prequel trilogies that we recently revisited on the show. The first episode of the show was Return of the Jedi. It seems appropriate to have one such as yourself on today to discuss Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker.
Yep, everyone's favorite Star Wars.
Uh-huh. Everyone's.
Everyone's.
It's funny. I woke up this morning and the first tweet I saw was someone had tweeted, imagine finding a person of your preferred sexual identity and just your type, and you just never happen to talk about Star Wars until one day after months of dating, they say, my favorite Star Wars is The Rise of Skywalker, followed by Attack of the Clones.
Oof.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, that's perfect because I'm in that space right now. I rewatched the entire sequel trilogy, and in fact, I think this is the first time where I've watched them all back to back to back since they all came out.
Yeah,
and man, it's a weird trilogy to look at.
Yeah,
for completely different reasons than the prequels, and they just don't stick the landing with this movie.
Yeah, they don't, and there's a lot of reasons why. Because I think. For my money, a friend of mine who doesn't love The Last Jedi by any means, he does really. He puts it this way: The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi are a really good diptych. It's a really good 2-part story. His biggest issue with The Last Jedi was that it doesn't, to his mind, it doesn't really feel like the middle chapter feels like a conclusion. Which is a valid criticism, and one of the few valid criticisms I've heard from people who don't like The Last Jedi. But I think it's interesting, for my money, like The Force Awakens and Last Jedi work really well together because Rian Johnson did a good job of like yes-anding The Force Awakens. He's like, yeah, she's like, Rey really wants to find her parents. Yes, and they're nobody.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
Rey wants to find Luke Skywalker and hand him his lightsaber.
Yes,
and he throws it away.
Like the Luke abandoned the galaxy. Yes, and it's because he blames himself, which is something that's actually in The Force Awakens. There's a lot of yes-anding that really works to my taste.
Right.
And I think with Rise of Skywalker, it's more of a yes but. It's more of, like Rey's parents are nobody, yes, but actually they sold her to protect her because she's Palpatine's heir. Snoke is dead, yes, but actually he is a meat puppet for Palpatine. It's a lot of yes-butting. There are good examples of yes-anding, like I think, for my money, the Force Dyad, is a really good example of yes-anding. And I'm still shocked that was like, I'll never understand why they muddied the ground with having the Force dyad to like explain her Rey's power and her connection to Kylo Ren, and then they're like, and also she's a Palpatine. When you just had like, right, there you go, Force dyad, that works, that solves all your issues.
Yeah, fair stuff. But I mean, like, and I'm going to come off as very harsh in this movie because it killed a lot of the momentum I was feeling for Star Wars at the time.
Same.
Don't worry, I'll balance you out with optimism.
Our another past diet is perfect. But there are amazing scenes in this movie. Yeah. And then there are just some sort of depressing desires to sort of placate the masses in some cases, and in other spots just to feed the worst impulses of Star Wars fandom. Like to have everyone be tied into specific bloodlines, to have some of the elements all be callbacks. Like, it depressed me when I saw it because there was so much potential in it, but at the same time, it doesn't quite work. And part of it is the original sin of The Force Awakens, which is that it is a soft reboot that feels like a fan film, like a really amazing fan film, or just a spin-off work, where we're introducing new characters, even a new droid, and it's tied into the larger universe, but it is not as firmly invested in it as the way that honestly 1 through 6 actually does end up being.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a problem then when you look at the larger, this is the 9th movie, and it's not only a conclusion to this trilogy, but it's actually a conclusion to the whole story that we've been telling over 8 movies at this point.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to set up. And when you have so much to do, it's difficult.
Yeah.
I get it's difficult. And then not to mention the fact that we're also going to have to be dealing with the death of Carrie Fisher, who was supposed to be one of the main characters of this movie.
Right. Yeah.
And that is going to dramatically change the type of story you're able to tell in the first place.
Yeah. I think both of you are right in the fact that this movie in particular walked a lot of things back. And that's why it has so much to do. Like, I remember thinking that I wished that Kylo became Ben a little sooner in this film. Because I just feel like there's so much work to do in that last part of the film to kind of get him to the space where he's like really with her and joined her on her personal mission, whatever that may be in our official pitches later on. But I just feel like because we spent so much time like resetting almost, it's not a full reset, but it's a partial reset, that it takes a little longer to get where we need to be to get to the conclusion, which makes the conclusion feel rushed.
Yeah.
And kind of gives us season 8 of Game of Thrones traveling, where like everyone, I mean, this planet that no one can find must be in the very center of the universe, and everyone can find it in this movie because it takes no time at all for everyone to get exactly where they need to be so that the day can be saved. But I think that part of the problem of walking some of things back, instead of just embracing and yes-anding and being like, okay, this is where we started and I have to go from here, is that the last, I'll be generous, the last 45 minutes is just a rushed train wreck because you just have to get it. You got to get it done now. You got to get it done.
Yeah, and there's this weird desire to stuff a lot of things in this movie that are brand new. Like people have said that this is a movie that is trying to be episodes 8 and 9 because 8 was not satisfactory in terms of moving forward the story that wanted to be told in this movie. And so it's doing a lot of heavy lifting to try to get there. And I think a lot of it is wasted. Like, I think that they stuff a lot of things in. And I've heard that the original cut was substantially longer. What was it, like 4 hours or something to that effect?
It was a lot longer. And I mean, from what I understand to that point is that, you know, this is, to put it simply, this is the JJ cut. There is no JJ cut that's out there. Like, but I think it's one of those things where I forget the writer's name. They wrote a larger story than could really be put into this final act, and they, you know, made a very long film. And you know, JJ cut it down, partially for himself, partially for the studio wanting to have a 2.5-hour movie. And by studio, I mean Disney. You know, so they kind of made a really small, a really jam-packed film that didn't have the time to breathe. But again, this is the JJ cut. I really want to be. I do not want anyone to ever like listen to this. Like, oh, is there a JJ cut at it? Like, you saw the JJ cut. It is the one that was in theaters.
We've heard whispers, but I think it's just one where it's like, yeah, there's footage that didn't make the movie. That happens with all movies.
Exactly. I mean, if there's one thing I've learned recently is that a lot of people don't know how film is made. I think it's interesting, and this is a larger conversation, but yeah, like if anyone says like, oh, it's a deleted scene, clearly there's a different cut. No, it's just there's a deleted scene. You know, that's it. Like they filmed it, it didn't work in the context of the story, so they cut it, or they changed their mind or whatever. It doesn't mean that there is a radically different cut that someone's hiding. You know, I mean, there are cases that has happened. You know, there are versions like Lynch's Dune was taken over by the studio, but like in this specific case, you know, this is the version that JJ wanted.
Yeah, and Star Wars has a huge history of movies, well, both being recut by the studio, but also being recut for the better. I mean, the original Star Wars is our classic example of a movie that found itself in the edit. Is a totally different movie as a result.
Oh yeah,
like I don't think anyone's really fighting for like that Biggs Darklighter scene to be reinserted in there for any sort of like super special edition. I don't know what you'd call it at this point.
Yeah, unless you're Alex from Star Wars Explained, who just loves Biggs Darklighter.
There's one person, Case. There's one person.
Man,
you were wrong.
I'm not gonna kink shame.
Looking at this movie, you know, it's clear that it is a product of being put together very quickly. The whole sequel trilogy in general had sort of an issue of the original trilogy and then the prequel trilogy each came out with 3 years in between, and this reduced it down to 2. And they tried to get it to this like cycle of production where there was a Star Wars property coming out every year up through this one, and then they were like, "Oh fuck, we've screwed this up. We don't know where we're going. We're rushing too fast. Let's pull it back." And now we're getting, you know, the Disney Plus stuff, which is generally speaking pretty good. We're all pretty excited about all of that. You know, Mandalorian scratches a particular Star Wars itch. It doesn't scratch everyone's Star Wars itch. And likewise, Bad Batch, not everyone's into animated stuff. Like, you know, we're getting stuff out there. And there's clearly love, and it's coming out when it's ready, as opposed to fitting that, like, well, we got to get it out there for, like, the December schedule kind of thing. So, like, that's great. This one was unfortunately suffering in this like crunch of like, we have to get it out there, and it's like you didn't. you got really far ahead of yourselves, and like we're stuck with a release date. That's just kind of an unfortunate thing.
People would have waited. I think Disney should understand this. We would wait. We do wait. That's what Star Wars fans do. We wait. I mean, clearly Adam has a Twitter letting us know when it's there. We would have just checked that, and we would have been like, hey, when do we have to wait for that for? And we would have been able to. We were fine with that. But you're right, Case. This very rushed schedules, and you know, just kind of like deciding that they want to make everyone happy with this film, and no one happy. Clearly, especially not Case.
Yeah. I think that it's weird because the thing that always boggles my mind about people, the thing that people don't seem to understand, like, The Last Jedi probably had the longest lead time in terms of production, more so than even The Force Awakens, because The Force Awakens was being changed basically to the last minute, whereas The Last Jedi was the one, like, he wrote it as they were producing that. It was all, like, so much more work was done in advance of that movie than any other film. And I think their thinking was, you know, even though, in case your point, it's like they were trying to get a cadence where, like, they have, while one film's in production, they're working on the early pre-production so they can dive right into the next one, and have that handover. And that was what was happening with the Trevorrow cut, the Trevorrow script, but for a number of reasons, including the passing of Carrie Fisher, they decided to shift gears to JJ after some consideration of other filmmakers, and they decided that, you know, like, let's, you know, give ourselves 6 months extra lead time when they really should have given themselves an extra year, because that was Disney being like, you know, let's just get it out. We need to get it out. And I think that if there's a better world where, like, they decided, like, we'll push it from May 2019 to May 2020, where we're only getting because of the pandemic, we got it out now as a better movie, because JJ would have done like a shit ton of reshoots and just made a better movie. But we got what we got.
And unfortunately, what we got is in a lot of ways trying to overcorrect for what was sort of the fan outcry of The Last Jedi, an outcry that I'm not convinced would happen now. Like, after The Last Jedi, Rian Johnson went on to do Knives Out, and that has, I think, earned him a lot of like good favor in film communities that he didn't have at the time of Last Jedi. So there is a little bit of a vibe there. You know, we know that there's a lot of hate that was being directed at people who were attached to that movie. Kelly Marie Tran had to like leave social media because she was being harassed so terribly, and her character is almost written out when you get to this movie because there was just this big fan backlash.
I will say though, like since. Just to push back on that a little bit, there probably was a bit of reaction to The Last Jedi in the production, but you gotta remember, like, the idea to like return Palpatine, and a lot of the early ideas of this film were started before The Last Jedi had even premiered. So they were sort of already into production before or at least into screenwriting before The Last Jedi came out. So there wasn't that much like, oh, we need to react to what the fans were saying. I mean, I'm pretty sure I've heard rumors that like there was like a Reddit guy on set, like being like, what are they saying on Reddit about the film? But that is a rumor without any evidence.
Well, sure, but we do have scenes like when Rey throws away Luke's lightsaber. His Force Ghost steps out and catches it and says, and basically has a kind of an FU line to The Last Jedi where it's like, this needs a little more respect.
Into that, like, there are articles with Terrio, Chris Terrio was the writer, who said, like, no, we weren't trying to, like, shit on the movie. To their mind, it was this, like, well, he's completed his arc. He's come back and realized, hey, what I did was wrong. This is not how you should act. It's one of those, I'll put it this way. I think there's a lot of things that, because of the fan backlash and some of the narrative around the fan backlash with The Last Jedi and going into the Rise of Skywalker, that some creative decisions made by JJ and Terrio and everyone else, those decisions were made in good faith to make the best movie that they thought they could make based on their own interpretations of the film, The Last Jedi and the saga in general. But because of the narrative around the meta narrative, basically, we start reading into that. Like, well, that's a fuck you to The Last Jedi and that's a fuck you to Rian Johnson. But when in fact it's probably just like Terrio and JJ are like, he threw it away. That was where his character was, and then he picked up the lightsaber at the end. So when he comes back, he's gonna catch it. Like that's where they're coming from.
Yeah, that's fair. And that is how I read it in the scene, but it does feel from a meta perspective that there is at least commentary in terms of trying to distance itself, or at least in terms of moving the characters more in line of where they wanted to end the movie. From my vantage point, it felt like they were trying to shift characters further along the character development to get to the end narrative that we wanted for it. It felt kind of like, to bring up the Game of Thrones discourse again, the pantsers versus plotters kind of scenario, and like really trying to drive the plotter one, which I think is a reductive kind of discussion about screenwriting. I think that if you have no plan, that's a problem, and if you have no feel for your characters, that's also a problem. So I don't think writers need to necessarily fall in one of those two camps, but it does feel here like they wanted Luke to be more of an approving spectral figure for Rey at that point, so they shifted him a little bit more that way. I think there were a few spots like that in the movie where it's like, well, we need to get him, we got to get him back in the mask so that he can be, a toy figure here for a little while, and then, go through his arc as like going, returning to the light after becoming so dark,
right?
When he's already made part of that journey in the previous movie. Things like that.
I mean, toys make the world go round, so at least the Star Wars world.
Do they?
That's what they base everything on, right?
Yeah, that's what they think. But that's all outside the story.
So I'm gonna say that the fight scenes were pretty dynamic. I mean, like overall, they were grand and they were big and doubling down on or yes-anding. I'm going to use that. Yes-anding the Dryad kind of space FaceTime force calls from Last Jedi in this led to some really cool stuff, and like kind of where you see this reality between these two characters kind of meld into one, so that even if they're in different parts of space, they can still share like physical items.
Yeah.
And so there's some really cool stuff done with the effects in that, and it creates a new level to fights that we haven't really previously seen. And I think that it makes for a really interesting interrogation, especially when she's in his quarters and he's on a planet and kind of like he's trying to figure out where she is. And it's the props that give it away, like their locations. That's really cool. That's a cool thought. That's a cool thing. I thought that the lightsaber fights actually in this last film were probably more dynamic than all the other fights in the previous movies of this trilogy. Not previous trilogies, but this particular set of 3 films. And I thought that they actually did a really good job shooting them, and a really good job, kind of creating those huge, larger-than-life sword battles, which is very cool as a Star Wars fan to see. I mean, that's what we like, right?
Yeah. I gotta harp on the across space battle, like Rey and Ren's quarters and Ren down on the planet surface. That is my favorite sequence in this entire movie. It's one of my favorite things from this trilogy. It's so frustrating that it's in my least favorite of the 3 because it's so good. It does wonderfully grow on what was established in Last Jedi. And it is the only major thing in this whole trilogy that changed the way I thought about the Force, which I think was really cool.
Yeah.
This is a sequence where all of a sudden the concept of how the Force works really became crystallized as it's not just psychic powers. It's not just they can move stuff in their mind or reach out to people. It's the thing that really made very clear what is in the text of The Last Jedi, but still doesn't feel it, that they are not just appearing as apparitions to each other, that they are literally interacting with each other. And
that there's a connection that ties them together.
Yes, and this is the moment where it really was size matters not. Like, that this is the spot here where it doesn't matter where you are in the universe or how big or how small you are or, whatever your condition is, you are able to interact in a way with someone through the Force in a way that resonates and is empowering to you because you are in the service of the Force, which I thought was so cool. Like, this is the moment where, oh, maybe from Yoda's perspective, he's not actually flipping around and moving really fast. Maybe from Yoda's perspective, everyone else is moving in slow motion through the Force, and he just is moving by way of the Force. Like, maybe, this is the moment where, oh, it's not just that they happen to have psychic powers while they're fighting with laser swords. It's that they're fighting on an entirely different dimension than what we are able to perceive outside of it. Like, effectively, these are 4th dimensional fighters. Like, they are outside of time space interacting with each other across vast distances in combat. And that's so fucking cool. Like, how do you get a sequence that fucking cool in this movie? It's so goddamn smart, and at the same time has such interesting visual language. I think The Last Jedi, just in general, the overall, the mise en scène, the way everything is arranged and the set pieces are really interesting. I think all of that is just incredible stuff. And I think that this movie doesn't ever quite have as dynamic a set piece, but this sequence is the closest, where you have snow inside an Imperial Star Destroyer, you have berries dropping to the ground, and ultimately you have a podium with the head of Darth Vader being smashed and falling to the floor in this little World War II era town. It was amazing. I love it, and it changed the Force for me in a way that I couldn't get over how good it was.
And that revelation, M. Baba Freak, wasn't enough to make you change your mind about this movie?
Yeah. No, and because I agree with everything you just said. So it does, I'm agreeing with the way the Force. I like the Force dyad. To that sequence in particular really stands out. I think it's a really good looking film. Something that a friend of mine said, it's the biggest difference between the prequels and this film in particular is the prequels are a good story poorly told. Whereas the Rise of Skywalker was a bad story well told. It looks really good. The performances are really strong. I think for what they are. I love the Force Dyad. There's certain sequences that I really like. I like seeing Poe behind the Falcon. I love seeing Rey. I always love seeing Rey in the Falcon. I think it's just a cool visual. I like seeing Rey as its new lightsaber. I like her getting training the Force, so I don't think training is that important, despite what the haters say, but they can suck it. I think there's lots of little moments, like even the light speed skipping, just that feel very Star Wars-y. They just don't coalesce into a coherent narrative. I mean, and even Palpatine's Return, like I don't necessarily mind it. In Exegol, I don't necessarily mind. I just feel like, and I think we brought this up earlier, it's all just very rushed. Like I even don't even mind like the Fetch quest. Like it's an interesting idea for a Star Wars, but I don't think it was something that should have been done in the third film in the third film in a trilogy, the ninth film in a trilogy of trilogies.
Yeah, it's a little late to be adding the side quests for people at that point. And it's clunky. Like the fact that it's like none of it actually makes sense, and there's like way too many steps is just more on top of it. But I want to go back to Palpatine for a second, because I was thinking about this one. I rolled my eyes when he first showed up on screen. But the more I think about it, the more I don't think you can actually do anything else. I think that is ultimately, if this is the ninth movie in a franchise of 3 trilogies, and you need to have any kind of through line to connect all 3, you either need Palpatine specifically, or you need some sort of way of representing to the audience that this is the larger Sith threat. Like the presentation that Palpatine gives at the end, where he's all the powers of the Sith are housed in me, and like all those who came before are through me right now. Yeah. And in the same way, Rey is representing all of the Jedi. Like that kind of moment right there, I think is actually, that's the appropriate stakes that you need for this to be for the end point after we've already had both Revenge of the Sith and Return of the Jedi. Like that actually makes too much sense. And there's a part of me that was so invested in the old EU, where Palpatine kept coming back as clones, and it just was like, it was almost to the point where it was like fucking Kenny from South Park. And when it showed up here, I was like, I don't know about this. But in retrospect, especially if you're looking at this as a canon of 9 movies and nothing else, I kind of think you need it. And so I think ultimately it was a good choice.
I mean, it's one of those things where I'm always of two minds, where I see your point. I think there are ways that one can handle Palpatine's Return in a less clunky way, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But there's also, like, I was thinking about this morning, like, what if it's Plagueis? Like, what if Snoke isn't actually dead, that, like, he's like, you thought you killed me, but Snoke Plague, my real name is Snoke Plagueis. I don't know, some shit like that. Like, where, like, something that you can tie it into, like, this larger Sith threat that, like, he's been there for a while. Or there's three ways, really. There's Palpatine, Snoke returning and being something older and, more connected to the grander Sith tradition than we anticipated, or it's Kylo.
Yeah.
And I kind of think that, like, it's Kylo is the main villain, which I think would have made for a better film. But it then would have not become. I think if Kylo had been the main villain of Episode 9, which to my feeling he should have been, it would have meant that it really wasn't the end of the saga.
All right, I mean that's fair, and like I guess part of it is me looking at it and being like, all right, well, what is the end point for Kylo aside from just being a bad guy? And I certainly feel that the movie didn't spend enough time with Kylo being Supreme Chancellor or Supreme Leader of the First Order. Like that seemed like he immediately went back to the dragon position. As soon as they basically just establish Palpatine's out there, and it was just like, oh, and I think that's sort of that's the danger with Palpatine and with all of this, which is that it's very easy to feel regressive to the original trilogy. Like there's so much of this movie that feels like it could have been set between Empire and Jedi and would have worked just fine.
Yeah. Well, I think also my thing is that I genuinely have a problem with Darth Vader. I have a problem even with Darth Vader's redemption in general, because I think, like, as a society, we like to redeem people who are really terrible way too easily. And the fact that, like, children run around dressed as basically a war criminal when you really think about it always kind of bugs me. And so I actually would have liked them to just kind of double down on Kylo. I agree with Adam. I wanted Kylo to kind of just be like, no, like I've already passed the point of no return. Like if he, that's what I'm saying. Like I either needed more time with Ben or I needed him to just go to the deep end and just be Kylo forever and not be redeemed, because I just feel like we spent so much time redeeming terrible men in movies and it always kind of irks me, because then people still walk around and like, I don't know. I'm sorry if you're out there thirsting after Kylo, but you creep me out, okay? I'm sorry. I'm not trying to kink shame, but honestly, like it's just something that weirds me out that we continually do this stuff. And I feel like on some level, like maybe just like from my modern feelings as a person in this modern world, like to me, like Kylo kind of is a good representation of like an internet insult to me in the first couple of films. And for me, I'm like, do we really need to redeem this character? Do we need him to follow that? Is that something that is a worthwhile journey? What do we actually get? What does Rey get? Is this valuable to her journey? Pulling Ben back? Is she really the person that did it? Like, you know, Leia does it, but she doesn't really do it because she's not really in the movie. So do we, you know, I assume, I don't know, but I assume that Harrison Ford showing up the way that he did is kind of what they may have done with Leia. I don't have inside information, so I don't know. But like, I don't know that was necessary. Is it necessary to redeem Kylo? Is it necessary to redeem the Skywalker name? Is the Rise of Skywalker the fact that he is the dark side? I mean, I don't know. Like, I feel like I kind of always questioned that when I was watching it. I honestly, that was one of the few things that I hated the kiss. And I was just like, he's a murderer. Mm-hmm. Like, he's far less redeemable than most people in this film, and like in these trilogies.
Yeah, that's very fair,
especially considering like he does make a choice at the end of The Last Jedi, and it's like, if you want to redeem him and have a redemption, I don't think that's necessarily a bad story choice. I think as presented in this film, and to your point, like it's a little too easy. It's too easy. It was too easy for Darth Vader. It was too easy for Kylo Ren. You know, we don't actually see Kylo Ren like murder children the way that we see Darth Vader do that. You know, there's a lot of,
we know that he's obsessed with this legacy, though, right? He's obsessed with this lore, and like, you know, being an allegory for space Nazi, that's basically a person being obsessed with a high-ranking Nazi officer and like going through its greatest hits and like, oh my God, like, and he did this and he did that, and I'm going to be just like him. I'm going to be like my grandfather, and I'm going to rule the universe and bring order to it, and in this hyper-violent way, using this darkness that's inside of me. And it's like, this person who actively chose this path, right? Because you can say whatever you want about Anakin and you know, that kind of thing, and his fall from where he was and what attributed, but like Kylo's actively from the get seeking this lifestyle,
right?
Actively,
yeah. And it's also, I was just thinking about this when you were talking about Kylo. You know, I kind of wish we had a American History X redemption, because that's kind of what he is. You know, he is. One thing I always really liked about the First Order that really wasn't explored is that it's the alt-right. You know, it's these people who are looking up to the grand vision of this former fascist state, and they're trying to rebuild it. And you know, I would think it'd been really fascinating that like if you want to redeem Kylo Ren, you kind of have to do the work. And like American History X does a really good job of like, here's a neo-Nazi. He is a bad person. He murders people. And then you actually see him learn the error of his ways and then work to find that redemption. And I think that's like something you necessarily couldn't do in episode 9. You could do in episode 10, but you have to set the groundwork in episode 9. So yeah, it's like, I kind of like the idea. And I know this will make a lot of Raylos mad, but like I did like the idea that Rey shut the door on him in The Last Jedi. And I kind of wish, like, I'll put it this way. I don't think there's necessarily anything inherently toxic or wrong in shipping Kylo and Rey. I do think that in terms of the text as presented after The Last Jedi, they weren't necessarily going to like get back together right away or get together right away or whatever, however you want to present it. I think if they were going to have Kylo go through a redemption arc and sort of a Jane Austen sort of like turn around and they realize what they mean, they needed to do the work, and The Rise of Skywalker just doesn't do the work.
Yeah.
It gives you the cliff notes. And I think we've all sort of said this before, but like in various ways, this is the Cliff Notes version of a better story. You know, there's like a lot of things in this that you're like, yeah, that works, but you didn't do the work to get there. Like, I don't necessarily think Rey as a Palpatine is a bad idea. I don't like it. I think it is a bad choice creatively for not just this film, but the saga in general, and also a big misunderstanding of Star Wars. But it's still not inherently a bad idea. You know, Kylo getting redeemed, not a bad idea. All the things in this movie, not necessarily a bad idea. Just, you know, they just don't do the groundwork to get to those moments to be earned. They're not. You have, you know, your point case about Luke, you know, getting to the catching the lightsaber. You're not doing the work to earn it.
Yeah.
You're not getting us there. You're giving us the moments with that, like, you're giving us the moments without the scenes to bulk them up.
And that is consistent with the third part of each of these trilogies.
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah.
God, yeah.
We have spent plenty of time talking about Revenge of the Sith and how they were trying to cram in basically all of the development that we were supposed to get in that trilogy all into one movie. And Return of the Jedi, honestly, has a lot of those issues as well, because the decision to wrap up the trilogy came right as they were going into production, as opposed to long before. You know, it wasn't built to be a trilogy. It was built to be a play on serialized storytelling. And it's impressive that Jedi ended up as good as it did in that regard. And that's probably just because it hadn't had a chance to build up so much momentum. And then Revenge of the Sith, at least, was building to a point that we all were very aware of. This is unfortunately trying to do all of that very quickly, but also wrap up a massive story that has way more stuff going into it than any other point in the series.
And make sure that you have room for merchandising, and make sure that you have room for future projects that may not be part of this, but may be spin-offs. Wink, wink.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I will say, like, to the spin-offs, that is like not something that JJ is thinking about, because, and this is something to really keep in mind when discussing any Star Wars film. The Force Awakens and The Rise of Skywalker are essentially licensed films. Bad Robot produced them. Those, JJ got the rights to do them, and Lucasfilm was involved, but when you talk about, like, how involved they were for The Last Jedi or Rogue One or Solo or any of the TV shows, it's a completely different version of that with The Rise of Skywalker and The Force Awakens, where JJ basically came in as a licensed author and said, like, all right, this is the story I'm telling. You've given me the rights to do this. I'm going to do the story. I don't own this, but now you're letting me do what I want to do. The other thing is that I think the biggest thing and not just like it was trying to be the end of a trilogy of trilogies, the biggest problem with it, to my mind, is that it's the end of it's trying to be the end of a trilogy of trilogies, but only really ever references the middle three chapters.
Yeah.
Like, and that is the thing that I remember going out to the movie with a friend of mine who loves the film. And this is it was a 4D screening, and I was like, all right, let me go hang out with my buddy. Let's go see this film. because I haven't seen it in a while, and we should stay friends. So he's like, I already want to go see it in 4D. I'm like, all right, fine. This will be my fourth time. It'll be the last time I see it in theaters. Might as well. And I had sort of like gone through, like, I have issues with it. I like it a little bit more. Okay, I've kind of accepted this. And then the fourth time I was like, I hate every single second of this because my friend was laughing at all the wrong moments. And I said to him afterwards, I'm like, look, my issue with it is like, it's you make a film that's trying to address 8 previous films, but you're only referencing really 4, maybe 5, if you count that one line from Revenge of the Sith. Like, you're only referencing some of them. You're not looking at it holistically. It's not even referencing the prequels. He's like, well, no one gives a shit about the prequels. I'm like, well, you don't. But that's the fucking story. Like, the story begins in episode 1, and you're not doing anything. They're not doing anything with the content and context of that first film, or those Attack of the Clones, or Revenge of the Sith. Like, they're not building on it. Also, I'm like, clearly you are a 40-something-year-old man who doesn't pay attention to the internet because kids love the prequels.
Yeah.
You just missed out on it. So there's a lot of sins in The Rise of Skywalker, but the one I think that always stands out to me is how much it ignores the prequels.
Yeah. Case and I actually had a conversation about how you feel about certain Star Wars movies might be when you're introduced to them. Like when you started watching. And I was like, all these younger kids, they love the prequels. Like, I'm not a huge fan of them. I really hate the second one. But I get it, and I do think that they should reference some stuff from there because it makes sense, especially since this guy is obsessed with Darth Vader. Like, Kylo's character is obsessed with Darth Vader. That's the whole thing, right? Like, he keeps looking at this freaking helmet, and they never do.
Yeah. Like, I want to go back to my point about Palpatine. He makes sense as a major figure, at least to be referenced, even if it's going to be, oh, this is our new avatar of the dark side of the Force, and Palpatine was the previous one kind of thing. But he makes sense as a final, like, as an endpoint, assuming you're looking at 9 movies. And I don't actually think he does if you're only looking at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, because he only appears then in 6. Like, he's barely, or he's past, in past referenced in 5, or like 4 small references in 5. He shows up in a hologram, but he's a villain, the villain of 6, and then. So for this movie to necessarily need to like feel anything about that, I don't know if it does. And like, I think you could have done a more interesting movie if you were only worried about the original trilogy by going off on what the First Order itself is. Like, what is its end goal? What is going on there?
Yeah.
I mean, let's say what we're all thinking though. Like, Snoke shouldn't have been Snoke. It should have been Darth Jar Jar, right? I couldn't help myself. I'm sorry, Case.
I like you, Sam. No, I think you're the bee's knees, Sam. I think that's pretty cool.
I think that's where we should have gone. It would have perfectly pulled in, and then like there would have been people that'd be like, "See, I fucking told you, Darth Jar Jar is a real thing," and he'd be like, "Misa, do not think you know what you think." It would have been amazing.
Misa gonna show you powers other might call USA unnatural.
Misa, feel the anger. Yusa, feel the anger.
I've got to say, the fact that we don't even get like a montage shot where we see Gungans on Naboo or anything like that, like that's the crazy part to me. There's no allusion to any of the sets of the first. Aside, apparently it's Mustafar at the beginning, but it doesn't fucking look like Mustafar. Like who would know that when you're looking at this? Like there's nothing that's really tying in, and I likewise think that that's an issue with this movie, and why I think Palpatine works okay if you are trying to make it part of this 9-part saga, but again. As part of 6, it doesn't really work. One last thing before we get into our pitches, because I think we can kind of go in circles about this movie for a while, since it's like, there's a lot of great shots. There are good action sequences. Actually, before that, I don't like that Poe has basically turned into Han Solo by this movie. He was not Han Solo in the first 2 movies. That annoys me, but that is that's for pitch conversations. Let's talk about the title, like The Rise of Skywalker. What the fuck does that mean?
I heard, and this is apparently there were 2 versions of the script, the title that were being picked like last minute before the movie came out, and they decided Rise of Skywalker because the other title would have given too much away. I don't know what that is yet, but yeah, I kind of like. There's a part of me that like I like the idea that Skywalker is in the final title because it's the Skywalker, like, you know, the end of the saga. But it doesn't really mean much. It doesn't make much sense within the content with what's presented in the movie in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I could kind of like, and this would be me like making shit up, is just that Ben kind of rises to the occasion. Like, he comes forward, and then at the end, she chooses her own name. And she chooses to be a Skywalker. And I would say, like, that would be the only thing that I would kind of, you know, like, basically, like, she's basically choosing her path and choosing not to be a Palpatine. Yeah. And that, I mean, that's my best uneducated guess.
Yeah, that is what happens at the end of this movie. I just think that scene is so painful, and it doesn't really make sense in character.
Yeah. It's just, again, it's like this nostalgia moment for nostalgia. Whereas, like, I thought it was going to be like she was, like, the version I always had in my head was that she was going to be a Skywalker, like that was the new name for the Jedi. That like the Rise of Skywalker, and like, oh, now the Jedi are called Skywalkers, which I would have been perfectly happy with. I think that would have been a really like clever way to sort of move the narrative forward. She's like, yeah, I'm Rey Skywalker, but Skywalker is, you know, sort of like it's another example. It's like you become a doctor, you know, you go like, or like a lawyer, become Esquire, like you're,
right,
you know, like it's like, oh, I'm Adam Garcia Skywalker because I am a Skywalker. I this is what I do.
Yeah.
So that's what I thought they were going with. But
it's a real Darmok enchilada Tanagra. It's the metaphorical nature of language, and
exactly.
And our real language works that way too. Like almost every word we have for a thing harkens back to something. Thunder is named after Thor. You know, that's just how it worked.
Yeah.
And you can see that in modern language where every device, everything, you know, everything's a Xerox, everything's a Kleenex. Like the brand takes over. And you could see that, like, maybe Luke becomes the new inspiration for when they're colloquially speaking about Force users, it is a Skywalker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think also, though, it is a callback. Like, that scene, even though it's not the most amazing scene, but it is a callback to, like, in the middle of the movie, where someone talks to her on another planet and they ask her, it's in the middle of that festival.
Yeah, it's set up. Yeah.
And they ask her name, and she says Rey, and they ask her family name, and she says, I don't have one. And then at the end, she's asked again, and she's asked for her family name, and she says Skywalker. And I guess, like, in some ways also you can say, like, Leia was kind of a surrogate mother to her. And so, like, there is, you know, Luke trained her. And so I think they're trying to give you the warm feels. Now, whether or not that carries through, I don't know. But, like, I feel like that may have been the intention of at least that scene. And, like, she's claiming her family.
Yes. But again, this is a spot where, in theory, it makes enough sense, you know, when you describe it. But it doesn't work in terms of what they actually sell. Like, they're just putting the beat out there and not making you feel like it's earned. You know, she doesn't actually spend that much time with Luke. Leia, obviously there's issues, but also Leia has never called herself Skywalker, so there's that too. But even if she wanted to take that claim, she saw herself as being that connected to Ben, who is also named Solo anyway, so whatever. Like,
yeah,
it's again, it all could work. Like, you could have spent enough time setting up her feeling like it is through Luke that she has found purpose and family, sure, but they just don't in this movie, and she just like turns back and just like, Rey Skywalker, what? Like, because the scene is so awkward. And the scene earlier, yeah, it's set up, but it's also awkward, where it's just like, oh, I'd like to know your family name too. It's like, there are so many aliens in this galaxy. Not all of them have the same structure. Not even all the humans on this planet have the same structure for how you do names. Like, I don't understand why it felt like, oh, it's so weird you don't have a last name. That's not that weird. Finn doesn't either. And they don't talk about that in this movie. Like, they don't. And this is Finn just generally has a problem in this movie overall, feeling important. But as a foil to Rey, he is grossly wasted. And they really should have done something with that to sort of convey that they are now finding identity at this end of their journey. And that is what is giving them the strength to move on. If you felt like that for Rey, and if you felt something like that for Finn, that would make sense. But it's just look back into the distance and fucking Force ghosts.
Yeah, and it's also like to the Finn of it all. Like I always find it interesting that like that Boyega is hard on The Last Jedi, but like really enjoys working with JJ. And I'm like, JJ just didn't know what to do with your character at all.
Yeah,
he's done so dirty in this movie,
and that's like, and it's bizarre that like he talks so highly of JJ, because it's like, you know, he kind of half-asses everything. It's like he doesn't really get a Stormtrooper rebellion, which would have made sense for his character. He doesn't really get to be a Jedi, which doesn't make any sense at all, because it's like there's no hint that he's has any Jedi powers. In the previous two films, he just used a lightsaber, and certain people online mistake marketing for narrative, and it's and he's just he's there shouting Rey half the time, so it's a frustrating film.
Yeah. I think all of the side character, all the supporting characters, side characters, Samantha, all the supporting characters, I feel like because there's just so many, there's just so much, like there's just new stuff thrown at you left and right in this film. And it's the last film, and we're supposed to be wrapping things up, and all of a sudden I get it, like new planets, like fine, cool, make the universe bigger, but also like, yeah, we're trying to wrap this shit up. Like you're inventing new narratives. Like some of these characters almost don't even fit into what we need, and they're part of the side quest. And like you're using Kelly Marie Tran. Yeah, she could have been on the side quest. Like, you know, like and there's just a lot of like not utilizing what's already there. Except for Bubba Freak, he was totally fine and he was perfect and I love him, and don't anyone touch him in any of your pitches because I will stop talking to all of you. And just fair warning, I'm cool, I'm an adult. And like, yeah, no, I think that like they were like throwing the kitchen sink and the entire bathroom at you, even though that has nothing to do with the kitchen sink. But that's basically what this movie felt like. They were like, everything goes onto the wall.
And to that point, though, like the new stuff in it, that's the other thing that bugs me, is that they added all these new elements that really don't feel connected to anything else that's happening in the narrative, like Janna and
Kerry Russell's character,
just all these new planets. Kerry Russell's character. There's all these things that just get thrown in, and again, it goes to JJ's sort of sensibilities, where he likes doing soft reboots. He's trying to like take stuff that he likes and add his own new spin on it, but he's not really good at building on what's come before. And when you're trying to solve you're trying to end a trilogy and a trilogy of trilogies, you really shouldn't be adding new things. You should really be, and this is something for my own writing that I'm dealing with. It's like, I'm ending up a trilogy, and my rules are that if I'm going to add any new ideas or concepts, they have to be born from things that are established in the narrative already from all the other books. It's like, well, a good example is there's this MacGuffin, and I'm introducing some aspects to the story. I'm like, well, I could tie that to the MacGuffin because it does in the rules that I set up already. It's kind of there; those are there. Like, so it builds out from what I'm doing. And I think with Rise of Skywalker, he does he's like, well, what if we add a new, like a sword that is also a place you can go in a certain direction? It's like, well, that's not really established as something that exists before, like it feels like he's tacking things on. He's not building from what's established, if that makes sense. And
in that way, it feels distracting. It feels distracting. It's like, wait, what? There's new people. I have to learn about new people. Wait. Mm-hmm. Okay. Wait, who is this person? Why are they here? Like, and you're already having like this intense storyline with your main characters, and now you're learning new characters, and you're having some of these main characters go into these like side moments, and it's like, okay, I get it. Yes, maybe. And it's just, there's so much happening in this movie. Yeah. It can be a little overwhelming.
Yeah. And I mean, like, you're allowed to introduce a new character, but have them fucking matter in a way that isn't just here's an additional
Yeah.
MacGuffin. And there's so many MacGuffins in this movie.
Yep.
There's the captain's disc. There's the knife. There's there is the Sith locator device that they just won't call a holocron. Like, there's so much going on in this that to have just more and more characters thrown in there for the sake of adding stuff. Like, I think you just hit the nail on the head about this movie, which is that this is a soft reboot of the trilogy that we're in that is also trying to wrap up this trilogy. Like, there's the time gap going on. We're resetting all the pieces. At this point, Poe has now shifted gears to being basically just Han Solo. Finn is like now a little force sensitive, and like his days of being a stormtrooper are long past. And like Rose is now Leia's advisor, and like all the pieces are different than where we left off. And it would be fairly easy to jump into this movie fairly blind from previous stuff in the same exact way that Force Awakens was. That's a bummer.
And if you were a kid, you'd be totally fine with it because there's lots of cool light-up swords.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And those look great. The fights, they do a really good job, both this and Force Awakens, of having actual light sources in the, like, when they're filming, so that you actually get the glow of the lightsabers on people. Those look fantastic. That's wonderful. The John Williams score, all the themes that were introduced for this trilogy, great. I was thinking how much I really love Rey's theme. Like, it's plucky in like a really nice way, and I don't think I ever really thought too much about it in my initial viewing of this trilogy. But like, oh yeah, it's a nice detail going on in the background that really sells the character. Lots of great moments there. But again, as we keep saying, they didn't stick the landing, and they didn't make any of the things that they concluded with feel earned.
You know what does stick landings, though? Other podcasts on this network.
Yeah, Sam, other podcasts on this network are great at sticking the landing. So why don't we give a quick break to shout out one of the shows on our network. And when we come back, we'll have some pitches.
Hi, I'm Matt, aka Stormageddon, and I'm the host of CPOV Autographs at certainpov.com. It is a bi-weekly interview series where I interview folks from all over the arts, from writers to comedians to magicians to musicians, even actors, historians, podcasters, pretty much anyone who's willing to chat with me for a little bit. If you like interesting conversations with even more interesting people, go to certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, music is life, and life is good.
And we're back. All right, so I am not allowed to go before Sam. Adam, this is your first time on the show, but you talk about Star Wars a lot, so if you feel good, you're welcome to go, or we'll force Sam to go first.
I worry that if I start talking, I won't stop talking. So I'll let Sam go first. I'll be a gentleman.
Wow. I say guest first, but okay, I'll take it. I'll try to be brief. I'm gonna say, because this is a trilogy and because I can't go back and, change other things, gotta yes and all that stuff. Because ideally, if I'm going to do redemption, Ben, I would like him to figure that out last movie. But that's not gonna happen. So I'm gonna double down. And I am going to have Kylo go to the deep end. I am going to have him be past the point of no return and actually lead his first order and kind of create a cult mindset with his knights, trying to find his Sith apprentice because, Rey has kind of let him down. I'm only sad about that because I kind of feel like the Dryad can't happen then, and they lose some really cool scenes. But I feel like it makes more sense coming in from Last Jedi and kind of makes more sense into like what is kind of like happening throughout these stories. Because the problem is that because this tries to reset a lot of things, there is not the trilogy doesn't feel cohesive. It doesn't feel like one story going into another. It feels very jarring. I'm going to keep Poe and Finn and Kelly Marie Tran together. I'm going to probably have them drop off on some of the planets that we have seen previously, and specifically from the first trilogy, so maybe Naboo, things like that. That way, when we're introduced to new characters, they're from cultures we've already seen, and if we're going to get that nice fan callback, at least we're getting it in places that we've already been. I'm going to keep all the cute people, and I'm going to keep Babu Freak and the World War II esque kind of, fascists have taken control of this planet scenario happen. C-3PO was perfect. I'm going to leave him just the way he is. Love him. He's golden. Yes, I did mean the pun. I'm so sorry. I'm not sorry. I don't apologize. And, I'm going to let, as hard as this is for me, I am going to let Carrie Fisher kind of have a few moments at the beginning, and I am going to let her go early, and I'm going to expand Lando's role in this to kind of tie in that first set of series and just let Billy Dee Williams run wild being a mentor to this group. And then the end is going to be a showdown between Rey and Kylo, and leave it that way. And that's okay if that means that there's future. And Rise of Skywalker is Sith Skywalker, because he'll change his name to be his grandfather's name. He won't want to be a Solo, yeah. And that's how I would change it. There's probably more I could say, but I feel like both of you have a lot to say, so I'm going to hand it over.
Sure. So, assuming everything happens the way that it happened, where Carrie passes away, and they need to figure out what to do with this narrative, I would start this film basically with the funeral or shortly after the funeral of Leia. And I think a big part of what the overarching theme of this movie would be what happens when we're on our own. They don't have Luke, they don't have Leia, they don't have Han. They're gone. And if this film is going to be about Leia, then let's make it about Leia. She's not there, but her presence is felt throughout the entire film. So, either it's right after the funeral, the war has been going for 2-3 years. The First Order controls most of the galaxy, and the Resistance has grown a bit, but they're on the back foot. And I definitely, and something that Sam brought up is something I would love to do, is like go back to Naboo or Coruscant. I have, not necessarily, it's not necessarily in this order, but like seeing sort of a Game of Thrones-esque ground battle between the First Order and the Resistance on like Naboo. And that calls right back to episode 1. This big ground battle between the good and the bad. Whether it's the beginning of the film or the end of the film, I haven't decided yet. But I really want to continue on this idea that we use the Force dyad, and Rey and Kylo are connected the entire time. That Kylo is always reaching out to her and trying to connect with her, and she keeps on pushing him away. And then, they're still seeing each other on the battlefield. Imagine Rey leading the charge against Kylo, and they're just constantly always like close to fighting or close to killing each other. And then he has to get away. Let's see Kylo be this. Actually, that would probably be the end. The end would be on Naboo. Just to sort of, again, ties everything back, but it's like this big last ground battle. I want to see Kylo ruling from Coruscant. He's scarred. So the beginning of the film, I'm bouncing all over the map. So just so you know, this is what a writer's mind is like. My girlfriend and I once had a fight. She's like, "You're a writer. Why can't you say what you want to say?" Because it takes me months to figure out what I want to say.
No, you just have a whiteboard with all the things you're trying to get at, but it's
also, yeah, it's all over the map. So I sort of see the film beginning again shortly after the funeral, the loss of Leia. It is a felt through the Force in a way that nothing else is felt. It's the last Skywalker, essentially, of one of the twins. Kylo Ren is ruling from Coruscant, a battle-scarred Coruscant, and he feels it. And everyone understands that, the rules have changed now, because the last beacon of light, the last beacon of hope, the person that led them from the Empire to the New Republic is gone, and her son is the bringer of darkness. Is there any hope left? So it is this rallying cry of trying to how do we have to have this last stand. Is kind of like this sense of we need we're on our back foot. We've lost everything. We need to stand up and fight against Kylo Ren. Finn's arc throughout the film is building a stormtrooper rebellion. That's something that's I've seen the Trevorrow script. It's an idea that I've seen Alex Damon pitch around a lot, and I really like that idea. Like, he goes out and he builds a new helps them build a new army, and like takes them from the inside. He can go in as a underground. He can doesn't take Rose with him maybe, but like he goes underground. Maybe Rey, and like if you want to keep the Palpatine of it all, like what if it's like Naboo is Palpatine's homeland? Like what if his like an essence is there? Like, and you can have Kylo and Rey. The reason they're out going to Naboo is because the power is there. Yeah. And they need to like it becomes this, whoever gets there first will have this thing. I keep Rey a nobody. I think that's a really good storyline. It's something that she's the Force dyad. We keep that. I think to Sam's point, like Kylo kind of goes off the deep end. If I do think that if he does survive the end of Episode 9 with maybe like an act of redemption, he does not get fully redeemed, but that leaves room for him to have an actual redemption, whether that's in Episode 10 or if it's in the novels to sort of like help his character grow. And maybe him and Rey aren't a couple, but they're, I think what I really want to see is Rey be the one to sort of extend her hand and be like, I forgive you. Or, help him sort of come back to the light in some small way to sort of help his arc continue. I don't think I would have Lando in the movie because what is he doing there? As much as it is
mixing cocktails,
remember berries. Yeah, exactly. I think, I would love to see like Poe struggling with this. What is it? He went to the arc of what does it mean to be a leader, right? In Last Jedi. So now he is the leader. He is the de facto leader of the Resistance, and the galaxy is looking to him to lead it. Like Rey is sort of the person in front of the camera, so to speak, but he's the guy who's making all the decisions. So I want the film to focus on mostly the new characters and old locations. Like, you want to have a fight on the Death Star? Sure, that's an interesting set piece. I feel like I would want to see Poe on Coruscant, or like let's have them like freaking go to Bespin. Like, let's have them like the Resistance's homeland, like their secret base is on Bespin. It's that nostalgia, but it's also showing the progression of time. So it's like it's these locations that you've seen throughout the entire course of all 8 movies. You're returning to them. You're seeing Coruscant under the First Order. You're seeing Naboo torn up by war. You can go to Bespin again after decades, and it's been it's basically a derelict, and it's just sort of like listing to the side. But it's all they have. That's all they can get is like this abandoned Tibetan Tabana gas mine. What if like the First Order to boost their troops, they go to Geonosis and restart the droid factories and have all the droid. That's how they're bringing it out. It's this again. The thematic idea is, what do we do when our heroes are gone? How do we face the darkness when it's just us? And the choices that you make in those moments. That's very broad strokes without any real, real structure. But that's sort of what I'm thinking of if I were to sit down and rewrite the Rise of Skywalker, something that brings all the elements of every single episode into this finale, doesn't really introduce anything new unless it's new ideas or new versions of old stuff that we've seen before, and leaves, I think, the main cast. I wouldn't mind killing off Poe, though I wouldn't necessarily want to kill him off. Like, wouldn't mind killing off certain characters, but like leave Rey and Kylo alive at the end, because I think there's just so many more story opportunities for them in the future, and then you can have it still be the Rise of Skywalker, because maybe Kylo's like, I'm taking the name Skywalker because like it's the thing that I should be. And this the thing that I was finding so far against. I've been obsessed with my grandfather that I forgot his last act was as a Skywalker, and I'm going to be that.
One of the things I like that you said, and actually this was one of the things I was toying with but then abandoned, was so I grew up near Mother Cabrini High School, and at that particular church there is an entombed, there are pieces of Mother Cabrina's preserved body.
First tier relics.
Yeah, so one of the things that I thought of was like, don't bring Palpatine back per se to pull strings.
Right.
But have like a preserved Palpatine body, the way, and generally the way the Catholic Church does it, and I know because I walked past this casket many times, is they put the body in an airtight seal and then in a glass seal so that you can just see it. And what they did when Mother Cabrini passed was they cut her body up a little bit. So the one here in Manhattan, I think, just has her hand, like her left hand, and like I think one of her legs. And then her other orders have like different parts of her. So she's actually spread, and a part of her is preserved in every single part that she's at. But I thought you have this like tomb that has a preserved emperor, the preserved Palpatine, that does have some power. But you have these people that are not necessarily, they're not Sith. And maybe they're slightly force sensitive, but they're not powerful enough, but they worship him like a cult enclave. And they hold these secrets. And so like, I think Naboo would be, because you said that, I think Naboo would be the perfect place for that. And I just wasn't sure how to place that in my brain, but that would be the perfect place for him to be. And that would be a place where they would find power. And I think that would be, I'm working that into your script that you're rewriting.
Yeah, I also like I do like the idea, like, then it also what you're saying is because there's also this, I do like this idea of like the Sith Order, and that they sort of like, that they're these believers, these people who believe in the Sith, who aren't necessarily Sith lords.
Yeah,
because if there's a Sith Lord, then that means they are lording over someone. So I do want, like, wouldn't that be interesting? Like, yeah, like we're the followers of Palpatine. We've seen them on the Death Star in Return of the Jedi. So like, what if like the followers of the dark side come back and they're just like, we need, like, what if they offer Kylo Ren like the power of Palpatine, or something, and it's like not like the glove of Darth Vader, but it's like his essence is the key to unlocking whatever that can help you rule the galaxy, because then it's like it keeps Kylo's this obsession with legacy, and even though he wants to destroy the past, maybe he is going there to destroy the past, but like so he can take it upon himself. So yeah, I dig that.
Yeah. Case.
Well, so there's going to be some similar notes, because I think we have some similar complaints in general. And I have a very detailed Act 1, and then the rest is sort of like kind of feeling this out. So I'm going to...
This is why he doesn't go first. Go on.
So I'm going to start with saying that I assume that the desire, and because I read the interviews with JJ talking about how they were like poring over the footage of Carrie Fisher and trying to make it work in whatever script that they had. And I don't think they succeeded. I think that the movie that they have has very clunky dialogue, and I think they jam it all in too soon, rather than spreading it out to maybe make it a little less obvious that they're just sort of cutting this whole thing together. I think that that's kind of a bummer, but I get the vibe and I get the impetus, and I want to try to sort of respect that and work with the footage that we see and try to make it work a little bit better. I think that because they really want to have an on-screen presence of Carrie Fisher, and to have an arc for Leia in some form, I want to try to make that work the best way possible. And I think for that to happen here, we need a refutation of the great man mythos that Star Wars ultimately is perpetuating. That Star Wars, by virtue of it being so entrenched in our mythology, like the original trilogy is King Arthur. And the arc of Vader is this combination of Uther, Pendragon, and Mordred. And ultimately, Kylo Ren actually plays a Mordred kind of role here as well. But the thing is that's all trying to put the weight of history on singular actors moving through the space. And I think that oftentimes disregards the bigger things that happen. Like, is that the point that we're trying to ultimately make here? And I think maybe if we can work with that to create a more interesting narrative for the characters, especially because Kylo Ren was a popular character who a lot of people were looking to have redeemed or be a love interest. There's a lot of Reylo stands out there. So, like, how do we work kind of with that? And then to sort of work with the characters we have to sort of build the best possible narrative for it. Adam, I really like the thoughts about, like, Finn possibly being like a like undercover within the First Order. I think would be really cool. Like, that gives him an arc for this movie that I think would be particularly good at the beginning, because I think the spy is terrible. I think that, like, the idea of having a spy character is really bad. Hux kind of got, like, it was a little bit too much of the butt of the joke in Last Jedi, but I don't think it's ultimately unredeemable in this movie. And I think introducing Pride was a terrible choice. So I would cut the spy plot completely. And noting that, I kind of my thoughts are this: okay, open the movie with the Resistance on the run. Every time they arrive somewhere, the First Order shows up. Like, this is a group that's licking its wounds. Like, they are stronger than they were at the end of Last Jedi, but they have not recovered to full strength yet. So we could have Poe leading a group, maybe trying to, like, make deals and so forth. And my thoughts are, like, we could get things. We can ultimately get to things like the light speed skip, which I think is a great sequence. I think is a perfect idea. Yeah. I think that should be an escape, and I think it should be more dramatic of an escape than just they went and talked to one guy and then TIE fighter showed up. So my thought is that they go to Corellia, and what I want to establish is that the Resistance is super low on ships, so that they are trying to make deals to get some of those shipyards to start producing ships that they can then buy. And maybe it's a little black market-y, like maybe they're like doing some backroom deals, but that's when the First Order shows up and they have to get the fuck out of there real fast. And this is where we get the lightspeed skip. And my thought is that the First Order Star Destroyers that show up are being commanded by the Knights of Ren, so that we can actually, if we're committed to the Knights of Ren, who are set up in the first movie and not talked at all about in the second movie, this is a good spot to have them, where they command an orbital bombardment of Corellia to just wipe out all of the industrial sections of the planet, just like fucking destroy it all. And my thought is, all right, so Finn, Poe, and Rose, but maybe Finn's in like not there. Maybe it's just Poe and Rose, and, like, some other people, like, they barely make it away. And that's when Hux comes on screen and berates whichever Knight of Ren, or maybe multiple Knights of Ren, are commanding the Star Destroyer. And we can establish that the First Order itself is spread thin, because if they have taken over so much, then they are, like, their ships are in every system. Their troops are at the minimum number they have possible. They are pushing it so far, and it is all bravado that is holding this up right now. That people are scared of them, and that they have this reputation of being terrifying, but they actually kind of needed those ships too. Like, that this is starting to become an issue for them. And the Knights of Ren, or the Knight, can be like, can say, take it up with the Supreme Leader. And this is when we cut to Hux approaching Kylo Ren. And when he presents being like, your knights are not listening to me. I'm supposed to be in charge of our fleet. Ren can just not give a fuck. Until Kylo Ren says that, like, they destroyed Corellia against my expressed orders. And this is when we can have, like, a quick flash to the death of Han Solo. Maybe we can get a flash to Kylo Ren picking up the dice at the end of Last Jedi. And possibly get a shot of Solo. Like, this comes out right after Solo came out. We can easily get sets from Corellia. I think this is an easier one to sort of tie in together. But maybe not show the actual any scenes from Solo. But regardless, we can actually, like, try to tie this into the larger mythos. Like, Corellia is not a new thing to introduce at this point. It's a fairly well established thing to introduce at this point, and we know that the Millennium Falcon's a Corellian cruiser, so, or Corellian Corvette, right? So tying into the lore of this world, and now it's gone. And I think that should matter. Like, the First Order has not blown up a lot of places that we care about. It's not Coruscant that gets destroyed in Force Awakens. So, like, let's start having them be fucking scary for the things that we care about in this universe. So Hux leaves, and we stay. And I'm thinking, like, when Hux is talking to Kylo Ren, he should bring up, like, a hologram showing the bombardment that's occurring at this time of Corellia. And so Hux leaves. Ren is just sitting there, and we get like a shot of him, like of his back, and he's looking at the hologram of Corellia just being obliterated. And it's not being destroyed like a planet being destroyed by the Death Star. It's just straight up like every single city is being like leveled from space. Like that, like the amount of power that the Death Star required is not that essential. Like, who cares about the difference of like, well, the planet itself is physically gone, or no one is left alive on the planet. Like, kind of 6 of one, half dozen of the other. So we see Kylo Ren sort of like taking this in, and he gets up, walks through the hologram, and goes to the pedestal where he has Vader's skull. And like as he's walking, you get whispers and like playing in all of his ears. And as he walks up to it, it shift focus. So then behind him, as he's sort of like embracing the helmet, you've got Corellia being destroyed. And I don't know exactly what the bridge line is, but you get something to sort of then cut to Rey training children in the ways of the Force. It could be on the same kind of world that the Resistance's base is set up in this movie. And I think Leia's looking on. I think that Leia's role here is not to be like, I'm going to teach you how to be a Jedi. Rey clearly knows a lot at this point. And I think that Leia's role should be as an advisor teaching Rey how to teach the next generation. I think that you could maybe even get one of the kids from the end of, or like the kid from the end of Last Jedi, just to be in that crowd. And so you're building up Rey here. And this is an area where Leia looking on approvingly is better supported by the footage we have. And then you can have, like, while they're doing this teaching, Rey looks up with horror, and maybe Leia, we get there's like one really awkward point where like Leia gasps and goes no in like one of the footage, or some of the footage that we got. This would be a great spot for it because Corellia has been destroyed. So they like, like you cut to Rey like responding also. She like looks and goes master, and then like cuts to Leia going Rey, and then cut to Poe in a hologram giving a briefing of what just occurred to whoever is assembled at this location. And maybe you can cut around to see different resistance cells to sort of establish like, oh yeah, they're spread out, they're all over the place. And maybe Finn is not there, or maybe Finn, I was thinking Finn is there, but I do like the idea that he's embedded. So maybe he's passing information on to Poe or to Rose, and maybe give Rose then the exposition here, where Rose explains that that Poe confirms that the Star Destroyers that were responsible are the ones that belong to the Knights of Ren. And hey, guess what? This is a time where we get to explain who they are. A thing that never fucking happens.
Ooh, explaining things. What? That's so logical. Shut up. Go on.
Why would you explain things?
I know, but so we get this explanation of who they are. We set up the stakes for what they, or for why they matter. And then I'm thinking we cut to Endor, or specifically we cut to the Endor system, and we see a TIE fighter approaching, and there are just big shards of the Death Star just kind of floating in a decaying orbit around the planet. And you see along the orbit, there's like clearly impact sites, or pardon me, around the moon. Sorry, just to be precise here. But there are impact sites where like things have actually ultimately touched down, and so you can sort of set up some of the specifics there. And I'm thinking that Kylo Ren flies through some of the wreckage and finds the throne room, and then gets out of his TIE fighter in a spacesuit that looks more like the classic looking, or more like Kylo Ren from the first movie with the helmet. And maybe it looks a bit more Vader-esque in some of its design, because the fight suits that they wear look a lot like Vader's actual suit, like or like those those stormtrooper pilots. So he gets out and he walks along the wreckage of the Death Star using magnetic boots to eventually make his way into the throne room. And as he's feeling with the Force, and we can have like whispers calling to him and so forth, he like finds what would be some sort of electronically sealed device, and through the Force rips it open and produces what I am going to call in this a holocron. Like, it's what it is. And as it rises up, the whispers change into the laugh of Palpatine.
Which is a great laugh.
Yeah, oh, it's delightful.
Yeah.
Cut to Hux with the Knights of Ren and like all the different like admirals and so forth. They're discussing how they don't have the ships, they don't have the troops. And that's when Kylo Ren, clearly just arriving from that, walks in, spacesuit on, helmet on, and says like that those are no longer issues, and puts down the holocron. Maybe he can take off the mask at this point, but this way he walks in and we get like that modulated voice that like feels so toyetic, and also like, yeah, sure, if you want to have an actor pretending to be Kylo Ren at a thing, you can be wearing this particular suit. It looks like the movie, or like the first movie. But we have grown past the point where he needs to hide himself from everyone. So he takes off the helmet when he's actually like addressing them, and he explains that this holocron has information. And my thoughts are, it is a Sith holocron that has a personality engram of Palpatine and possibly all the Sith. It could be some sort of, I don't think we've ever seen it.
A collective.
Yeah, a collective repertoire for the Sith. Because I think the other question I have is, what is the ultimate goal here? And to take a note from Jack Kirby, I think that the approach needs to be a concept of freedom versus control. And I think that the dark side, sure, it has anger and passion and so forth, but I think that the ultimate goal, the reason why the Republic switched from clones to troopers and so forth, was to exert that control over people, to force them, mold them into this sort of rigid structure through artificial means, which is why I like the holocron being like a conveyance for it. But he had backup plans. And one of those backup plans is a fleet that's hidden in space that is loaded up with cryogenic suspense tubes, loaded with clones. And that this is where the First Order is going to get their fleet back. And this is sort of the break into two here. Because... yeah, like it's a little bit the Thrawn trilogy, but you know what? Fuck it. Like this is, I think this is a good threat. It's basically doing that, but without having to like awkwardly be like, oh, well, they have to like come up out of the water or the ground or whatever they're being stored on. Like this can be Clone Wars era Star Destroyers. Like they should look just like Revenge of the Sith era Star Destroyers. And they can even have comments about how they're so outdated. And it's like, yes, but we have better guns now that we could put on these things. But now we also have the soldiers, and they will all be super loyal to you. Because my thought is, if we're going to have Kylo Ren have a redemption arc of some kind, and have it matter, I think that the ultimate problem is that the dark side, by way of both the Sith and also the sort of rise of fascist power, needs to be about the unstoppable machine. Like the second movie actually calls attention to war profiteers and so forth, like building tech and so forth. Like Kylo Ren is already starting to lose control. The Knights destroyed his father's homeworld. It's starting to slip, and I want this to continue into the Act 2. The halfway part should be the Death Star fight, and I think, sure, that like that section could have crashed or something. I don't think that Kylo should physically be there. I think that it should be a second projection fight, because I think that's just a thing that we should accept about the nature of Jedi, or rather, like the fighting through the Force, because while they're having this fight, that is when Hux actually observes what's going on and sees like weird mist and like weird spray and so forth coming into the chambers of Kylo Ren. He's watching this like Kylo like slashing about, and he can't see Rey's side of it, but shit's just happening and it's really weird. And he's trying to understand what's going on, and then he understands at some point that they are in a fight, and Hux stabs Kylo Ren in the back and kills him. And in that moment, Hux sees Rey and Rey sees Hux, and Leia, feeling this, as Kylo Ren dies, and like there's a moment of a connection between him and his mother, she then goes and then transfers the last of her life force into her son after this has all occurred. And that's then the spark that's going on here. Leia revives in this repentant Kylo Ren, or Ben Solo here. And it would be nice to have like the Leia scene. Obviously it doesn't exist. Probably need to have the Han scene here in some regard. Maybe as he's like dying, maybe he calls out to his mother as he's fading away, and that's when she transfers it. But then my thought is that you can play out much of the remainder of the movie with the life force that is in Kylo being Leia's life force. And so that at the end of the movie, when Rey dies, if it plays out the same way, and Kylo Ren, or rather, when Ben Solo transfers his own life force into Rey, what is actually occurring is he is transferring the spark of life from Leia. So in that regard, the actual life that Rey has is one taken from Leia, and so she actually earns the name Skywalker in a more legitimate way. And it'd just be fun to have clones. I also think, like, all right, well, I don't like that Finn is made into a spice runner in this, because it's like, yeah, let's have the one Hispanic character be a drug dealer. Like that... pardon me, Poe. Yes, thank you. Sorry, Poe. Poe being
I didn't like that either.
I don't like that. I think that should just cut that whole thing right there. I do like the like the World War II Europe town where they're like hiding around and where you find Babu Frick. I like all that. Yeah. I'm not sure exactly how I'd work that in. I don't think Kerry Russell's character should be there. It's too much. But Babu Frick is fine, especially having to hack some information. Maybe it could be, instead of C-3PO read the dagger, because the dagger, I get the idea. It's dumb. Like, it's a protractor that like sticks out, and you have to be at the exact spot at the wreckage site to see
Yeah,
the spot.
It also just adds too much of the sides. Again, cut down on the side story. Find it, have him read it, like, or make it a book, make it something, like, it doesn't have to be that. Like, why are we, I don't know.
Why don't we pull data about Naboo and have it tie into, like, something that Amidala said while she knew Palpatine in his life, and that's going to fry C-3PO to, like, dredge up old memories that are, like, just, like, the fragments of files that are in his memory banks. Something to that effect.
Or make it R2-D2.
Yeah, who has never been wiped.
It's like, that, like, who's never been wiped, and it's like, he's been around for everything. Have him be a big part of this story in some way. Like, have him have information, like, oh, I know where Palpatine's from. It's from Naboo. And, oh, hey, I'll play a scene of, like, Palpatine and Amidala meeting, and, like, that was my grandmother or something. I don't know. It's just there's the criminal misuse of R2-D2 in Force Awakens and The Rise of Skywalker has not been lost on me, because I think it was used effectively as fuck in The Last Jedi, because that one scene, like, I'll put it this way, like, I think all of our versions of the story reflect this sort of nostalgia that was apparent in The Last Jedi, which was, if you're gonna have it feed it into the narrative. Like, like, you're gonna show, it's nostalgia to see Yoda and Leia show up again, like in the message, but it all feeds into Luke's arc. It all feeds into that, where I think a lot of the nostalgia that we got in the current version of Rise of Skywalker is there for the audience and not so much for the story. And I think that's what all three of us have in common, is that if we're going to have nostalgia, have it tie into the story, have it be a part of the narrative in some fundamental way.
Yeah. And so just my final point on this one is that I think that the holocron, especially once it's reunited with the clone ships, I think that should actually enable a scenario where, like, Palpatine, in theory, then transcends the physical limitations. I mean, he's effectively been digitized in this scenario. So one of the threats of this all is that now this evil is beyond a physical body that you can even kill. And so maybe it's a scenario where, like, this fleet can't leave this system, otherwise it can then spread. And I realize it's a little bit of, like, the Ultron scenario. That's a little bit of, like, a Matrix-y kind of, like, we're there. But I think that if we actually want to have it, and we can make a statement about the rigidity and artificiality of evil, as opposed to what is more of a concept of freedom and good that exists in the world of with, like, the light side. Like, the balance that's required is that too much good without the steel to preserve it is going to be vulnerable to evil. And obviously evil, so it might be like a might versus right. Jedis who are complete pacifists are susceptible to outside threats. So they have to engage in what is theoretically evil acts, such as killing their enemies in the name of protection. But likewise, evil is in this scenario going way too far into a realm of turning everything into just programmed automatons and working in that direction. So in the same way, it could, instead of clones, it could have been like all the different robot ships. You could do a whole collection of all of them if you really wanted to, because again, this is the end of the movie. It might as well be a victory lap where we show all of our threats. And I love now, like, your thought with, like, Finn being embedded, because then he could actually lead a rebellion of the stormtroopers against the clone troopers. And then that way you get to Janna and those kind of characters without it necessarily having to be like, oh no, we're just you, but I'm a girl. Like, you could actually have it happen in universe, which would give him an arc in it. And I think that that Finn, and I apologize for earlier saying Finn, Poe, blah, 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 but Finn actually has the most compelling story. I mean, he has the most compelling story of this entire trilogy, like the stormtrooper who turned good. And I think that Finn giving the speech, however it is, to unite the galaxy against the First Order is the one that makes sense, because he is the person who has been the hurt most by them. He is the person who has the most reason to be afraid of them. You know, he is scared of them for so much of the first two movies, because all hope has been completely wiped out of him. And if at the end of this movie, it is his proclamation of hope that inspires people, I think that's a really good message right there. And to get a bit lefty here, I think the concept of collective action would be really strong here. Like, it's not about one person just being better with a sword. That it should be about us as a people rising up, which they do try to do. But it's also, it's also Rey holding both Luke's original lightsaber. We never find out what happens to his second lightsaber, and Leia's lightsaber. And one thing I forgot to mention is that I wouldn't have Rey have a lightsaber for the majority of this movie. I would have her have something like the stormtrooper tonfa stick that we see Finn use a couple of times, and in the first one, some kind of weapons that can counter a lightsaber. But she should be in the process of making it. We have never gotten to see that on screen in one of the canon films, and I would very much like to see the process of making the lightsaber. The thing that happens between Empire and Jedi, where it's like, oh, you've made a new lightsaber, it's so cool. Like, I'd like to get that on screen and build it into her staff, like we all wanted. I don't know why they didn't do that. Like,
because they didn't have enough time. They barely had time for the crap they were selling us in this one.
I know. This would be so much better, though, and especially because it ends with it. Like, maybe she's using Luke's for a little bit, like, because like some of the Leia footage had her holding Luke's lightsaber, so they're kind of stuck with it. Although that said, they could always be working on it. Like, she could hand it off and they could CG it into a different looking lightsaber very easily, and have that be the final part that she has to put together or something. And that happens at before she goes off and faces Kylo Ren for the second fight. So maybe that makes the first fight where she's somehow gets into his room and he's on the planet. Maybe she's not using a lightsaber in that scenario.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been cool, but I think I kind of understand why they would decide not to put that and instead put a training montage, since, like, unfortunately, there was a lot of talk about how she just shouldn't be able to do any of those things. And let's be honest, that's probably why they put that scene in, is just to shut people on the internet up, to be like, look, she's training.
Yeah, it's like
she's
one of those
getting stronger.
things. Yeah.
So
I don't mind. Yeah.
I don't mind the training at all. Like, I honestly, like, there's a lot to be said about just how Rey in general, her character being a girl, has been treated unkindly, and that, unfortunately, I feel like there's a lot of things that the writers tried to do in order to kind of, like, compensate for those things. I mean, like, in some ways, she's possibly the strongest Jedi we've seen on screen. I mean, she force heals. She's got lightning. She's like they are selling her hard. Mm-hmm. I mean, like they are selling her hard, and they, true to just society, girls just got to work harder to break that ceiling, and that's part of it. And so I think you don't get a scene like that because it is kind of seemingly, I mean, it's cool to me, it's cool to you, but seemingly it's mundane to, like, a regular person who's just gonna walk off the street who's like, oh, now she's just putting together a light sword or whatever. What about her training? How does she even know how to flip with it? Like, I don't know. So I think that it's a good idea, but I do understand why a writer would decide to instead choose her kind of running an obstacle course, training for the future, with, like, Leia watching her do so. Because one of the things that you heard, like, after the first movie and even after the second movie is, like, well, like, how does she even know how to do that? Like, how does she know how to fly a plane? Like, how does she know how to do that? How does she know how to do this? How does she know how to do that? But, like, we totally accept that all the other male protagonists that come before can automatically do those things. I mean, did Luke ever leave? Like, I mean, he never left that planet. That is just, I don't know.
Yeah, with Luke, I've always been sort of amazed. Like, everyone's okay with the fact that he's like, oh, I'm a really great pilot. I'm a really great pilot. I'm a really great pilot. And then, like, the first time he gets in, he's never flown outside anything, and he gets into an X-Wing with zero training and gets a bullseye the first time. And everyone accepts that because, well, he said he was a good pilot. Like, look, I said, I can tell you that I'm a really great runner. I don't run. I can't run more than, like, a 10-minute mile. Like, I run for shit. It's like, you could say anything, but because you have Rey say we need a pilot. You've got one, and she says you, and then he's like, I've flown around the planet, but I've never left the planet before. Like, that's basically the same thing that Luke did.
Yeah.
And then you have my favorite is just, like, I've seen this online a lot more, where people are like, well, like, I'm like, well, okay, fine, but where did Luke learn how to do a force pull? And they're like, well, Obi-Wan taught him over the third, like, but I'm like, but he was dead. It's like, well, no, he was as a force ghost. I'm like, no, what?
That is not supported by the text.
or they're like, I'm like, okay, great. So then you're fine. Then how does he learn to build a lightsaber? And they're like, well, he went back to fucking Yoda in Dagobah for that period of time. Like, it's no, like, not supported by the text. He clearly never went back until this movie. Like, what do you?
Yeah.
So anyway, they can find, like, the fact that they can, like, justify anything that Luke does, but, like, the fact that Rey is slightly stronger because of whatever reason, and that's why I like the Force Diet answers those issues.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's just stupid.
Yeah.
So tiring.
So on that note, I would say I would not do Rey being a Palpatine. I don't think that I think that narratively hurts her. I think unfortunately, and I don't know who suggested the idea, but unfortunately it reads poorly when it's someone like J.J. Abrams creating the movie, who is, the son of a producer and has like worked in Hollywood since he was 16. Like, it feels like someone who's like, yep, yeah, if you got the right blood, which is not what we should ultimately be trying to ascribe. We should be saying, like, sure, if you have these benefits, you're in a better position. That is the scenario for Kylo Ren. To have Rey be a worthy rival for him, coming from literally nothing, I think is a much stronger statement.
Agreed.
And also doesn't require us to awkwardly contradict everything from the previous movie. So just roll with it. And then, Leia's teaching her a little bit, and then she's passing on. She's also teaching the young what she knows so far. She's learning both how to do new stuff, but then also learning how to convey information to people. And I think that's an important part of the teaching process there. Like, Luke, this used to be a thing in the extended universe. Like, Luke arguably never really learned that much about the Jedi. Like, that he theoretically only learned from Yoda and Ben enough for them to end the threat of Darth Vader and Palpatine. So there was like a whole thing about like how Jason Solo was like, maybe he never learned enough about like the broader like spiritual aspects, because he was kind of purpose trained for this very dark time that he was in. And I'm not saying necessarily go that hardcore on it, but I think it would be nice to show growth for the character by way of that. And again, trying to make some of that Leia footage work. And I think her like looking on, and you can have some moments like being like, oh, the kids are almost ready for things. R2 doesn't think that they're quite up to snuff, or BB-8 doesn't think they're up to snuff yet. And, then she could be like, never underestimate a droid, or, however you want to like fit in those awkward lines. But like, you could do some of that there and have Leia come off as the High Master teaching then this just knight. And then there's all these Padawans who are training.
Yeah.
Also, I feel like Rey should have worn different clothes, or at the very least different colors. But yeah, definitely should have looked a little bit better. But that's not the biggest gripe in the world. But it's just like, that would have been nice, like have a different outfit.
But they already made all the toys.
But we can sell actions.
They still answer to the mouse.
You can have all kinds of toy variants. It's great.
Yeah, no, I hear you, Case, and I agree with you on most of the stuff. I really like the idea of her training the next generation, and I absolutely 1,000 agree with both of you that she should have remained as no one, like not related to anyone, blazing her own trail, and especially because I think that it was actually a really like lovely, hopeful moment with that child at the end of The Last Jedi, like that there was like this possibility, because that's the hope, right? Like ultimately, like, yes, like Luke was battle tested and he did what he needed to do to like end what the dark times that he was facing, right? But he also failed to kind of create a new Jedi Order, if you believe in the extended universe, and like there's and a little bit in The Last Jedi, right? Like that's part of it. He kind of failed in this mission, and so to have her as no one come forward and start succeeding where he could not, like under the loving gaze of the general and her wonderful assistant R2-D2, because I would totally throw him in there. Because imagine like adorable little scenes of him and young little Jedi's training. That'd be so cute. You know I love everything cute. And that would be great. I think that would be fantastic. I'm in. I'm going to throw some money at you. Make it. I'm joking. I can't afford it.
No one has enough money to make that nowadays. But yeah, I think we all sort of hit on points that we really like and want to. All of these are stronger than what ultimately was put on screen. Like what was put on screen felt rushed and felt like that they had a lot of boxes to check off and didn't really feel like they needed to spend the time making you care about why we were checking off those boxes. And I just think having any sort of point where you're trying to say we're doing something different or finalizing ideas that had been expressed but not necessarily capitalized on before would be great. You know, having Ren be the bad guy makes perfect sense for this trilogy. Having Ren not being able to control the First Order and the First Order is now growing like a virus out there in space, also a good way to like work with this trilogy and also sort of play on earlier stuff. I don't know. I think these all work a lot better. And I think I've expressed a lot of my Star Wars thoughts on Scruffy Nerf Herders. Adam, you've got your own Star Wars stuff that you're expressing ideas on. So actually, I feel good about what we just talked about. Adam, why don't you talk about what you've got going on that you can talk about?
Well, I've got a new podcast coming out on November 5th. It's the Green Llama audio drama. He is a Buddhist superhero from the 1940s that my father collected. I am the licensed author behind him. It's a continuation of the novels that I've been writing for over a decade. It's sort of the next chapter, even though the sort of middle chapter that I'm writing right now hasn't come out yet. So there might be some spoilers about the finale of my novel trilogy, but I kept it vague. So if you're looking for it, you won't necessarily know what happened, but you know something happened. It's really exciting. The cast is amazing. The sound design is amazing. The just everything has come together in a way that I never expected, and the music is just phenomenal. I have a couple of other projects that I'm working on that I really can't discuss just yet for a host of reasons. I am working my next Green Llama novel. I am also working my day job at Condé Nast. If you watch things on Vanity Fair, there's a good chance I probably produce them. Some stuff at Wired, some stuff at Ars Technica, but a lot of it mostly has been Vanity Fair as of late. Yeah, those are the things I can talk about. Also, I wanted to add, you can subscribe to my podcast at Radio Room on your favorite podcast aggregator, or in a couple of weeks to the Green Llama separately. But yeah, Radio Room, that's where you'll be able to hear it.
Cool. And for when the things you can't talk about yet come out, where can they find you online where you'll be talking about it then?
You can find me online mostly on Twitter at Lance Garcia, or you can find me on Instagram at Lance Garcia. Really, just type in Adam Lance Garcia, and yeah, you'll probably find me. That, or you might find Adam L. Garcia in Kansas, who sometimes signs me up for a red box.
Well, you can find the podcast at Another Pass. You can find me on Twitter at Case Aiken. Sam, where can they find you?
They can find me here or on our Discord and nowhere else, because I am just a figment of, I'm just a Force ghost in Case's reality.
Yes, you're just a voice being projected by some sort of dark lord, making me think that I have a friend.
Isn't that how it always works with a dryad?
Well, if you would like evidence that Sam is not a Force ghost subtly manipulating me into weird positions, she might actually still be doing that part, you can head on over to certainpov.com, where you can find more episodes of this show. You can find lots of great shows that we're putting on the network. Shows like our recently added Fables and Reflections, which is a wonderful show discussing the works of Neil Gaiman. Check that out. But you can also there find a link to our Discord server. We're having this call on Discord right now, but you can come interact with us directly, get sneak peeks, and occasionally we'll share pictures of our cosplay days, which we were talking about a lot before we started recording. So yeah, check out certainpov.com. Come find our Discord. We're having a lot of fun there, so come join us. But while we wait for you to come join us, Sam, what have we got in the works?
Well, next time we'll be talking about Highlander 2, The Quickening. But if you enjoyed this, until then, pass it on.
Thanks for listening to Certain Point of View's Another Pass podcast. Don't miss an episode. Just subscribe and review the show on iTunes. Just go to certainpov.com.
Another Pass is a Certain POV production. Our hosts are Sam Alicea and Case Aiken. The show is edited by Matt Storm. Our logo and episode art is by Case Aiken. Our intro theme is by Vin Macri, and our outro theme is by Matt Brogan.
All right, so before we get started completely, I just want to figure out where our expectations are in terms of talking about this trilogy as a whole, which is that I was lukewarm about The Force Awakens, and I actually really liked The Last Jedi, and then this almost killed my fandom of Star Wars.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a very strong feeling. I was okay with The Force Awakens. I was like, okay, it's kind of a repeat, but I guess rebooting. Loved The Last Jedi, and I think that at some point in the middle of this movie, I thought, fuck it, I'm just gonna enjoy this. I'm not gonna think logically. So I actually enjoyed this in the theater because I chose to. I made a decision that I was just gonna enjoy it, and And so I did. I enjoyed it. I was like, fuck it. They're all bad. They're all good and they're all bad, and I'm just going to enjoy it.
For me, I really loved the Force Awakens because I just loved the characters, even though it was a rehash. It's just like, oh, wow, new Star Wars. And The Last Jedi was like sort of a revelation to me because it did everything I didn't want it to do, like kill Luke, but it did it in such an amazing way, and I think it understands Star Wars in a truly fundamental way that I think a lot of fans don't seem to understand Star Wars.
I agree.
Yeah. And then Rise of Skywalker. Yes. Thank you. I got the Sam stamp. But the other thing that with Rise of Skywalker, there are ideas in it that I like. I feel like there are shining moments. I'm like, that's cool, Star Wars. But it's surrounded by just a shit story that I'm just like, I can enjoy moments. I can be like, yeah, this is cool and that looks nice. But I think that there's I'll put it very briefly, and I might explain this later. But Force Awakens, Mission Impossible 3, and Star Trek, all those films benefit from the fact that they're soft or sort of basically semi-firm reboots. Force Awakens uses the 30 years. Mission Impossible 3 just gives itself a time jump and a new mission. And Star Trek 09 is a new universe. He picks and chooses what he likes and gets to start over. Rise of Skywalker, he couldn't do that. He has to learn. He's not good at yes-anding. So. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think my biggest issue with this, and again, I said fuck it, I'm going to enjoy it. So I made it so. But my biggest issue was as I walked out with kind of slightly maniacal laughter at my best friend. I said, the biggest problem is he wanted to please everyone. Yeah. He wanted to make everyone happy by the end, and that is the biggest problem because you can't. You have to decide that it's okay for people to disagree with the choices you make, but you have to make choices. Do you ship Rey and Finn? Oh, don't worry. There's a moment where he almost says something, but you don't know what he said, and we may not go in that direction ever. We may not even tell you what that is, but don't worry. It's kind of in there. So if you want to write some headcanon about it, there you go. Were you like all about Ben and Rey, Kylo and Rey? It's good. It's fine. Yeah, they're going to do it. But don't worry if you're not with this because he's a toxic fuckboy. Don't worry. We're going to kill him. So they're not going to stay together. So you're happy. They're happy. Like everyone, they're trying to please everyone. And then at the end, which honestly, I've already told Case about how much I love all the cute characters. So bring it on. But they brought up every cute character at the end. And I was like, all right. Yeah. Shout out to some Ewoks. Let's do this. Like, let's see all the cute characters. And it literally was just like, and now, rounding the bases, every cute character you have ever seen for this finale.
But also but to your point, it was also like just from the original trilogy. That was like my but I'm sorry, I stepped on your toes.
Yeah, no, but it's true. But like, it's like fan callbacks just for the sake of like, okay, this is the last one. Let's just give everyone exactly everything they wanted, even though this is one of the most polarized fandoms and slightly toxic fandoms out there. Let's just try to please everybody.
Right.
And that means that the movie itself turns into a hodgepodge of almost directionalist garbage because it's like there's some really fun scenes. I'm actually glad you brought this because this is perfect for a podcast, right? It's always a movie with some decent bones and things that deserve to be saved and like actually look really cool. Like I rewatched this and I was like, these fight scenes are actually fairly dynamic. They look really good.
Hey there, Screen Beans. Have you heard about Screen Snark?
Rachel, this is an ad break. They aren't Screen Beans until they listen to the show.
Fine. Potential Screen Beans. You like movies and TV shows, right?
I mean, who doesn't? Screen Snark is a casual conversation about the movies and television shows that are shaping us as we live our everyday lives.
That's right, Matt. We have a chat with at least one incredible guest every episode, hailing from all walks. We've interviewed chefs,
writers, costumers, musicians,
yoga teachers, comedians, burlesque dancers,
folks in the film and TV industry,
and more.
We'd be delighted for you to join us every other Monday on the Certain POV Podcast Network.
Or wherever you get your podcasts, fresh and tasty off the presses.
What? That's not.
Can I call them Screen Beans now?
Fine.
Screen Beans.
So tune in and we'll see you at the movies or on a couch somewhere.
'Cause you're all Screen Beans now.
You will be mine.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.